Good evening. Today is the 16th day of December 2015, and we continue with our explorations in Savitri with our brother, Dr. Alak Pandey. Namaskar. As always, I begin with a letter from Sri Aurobindo. And this is most interesting because it was written in 1936. Savitri was originally written many years ago before the mother came, as a narrative poem in two parts. Part 1, Earth, and Part 2, Beyond. These two parts are still extant in the scheme. Each of 4 books, or rather, Part 2 consisted of 3 books and an epilogue. 12 books to an epic is a classical superstition, but the new Savitri may extend to 10 books. If much is added in the final version, it may even be 12. The first book has been lengthening and lengthening out till it must be over 2,000 lines. But I shall break up the original first 4 into 5, I think. In fact, I have already started doing so. These first 5 will be, as I conceive them now, the book of birth, the book of quest, the book of love, the book of fate, the book of death. As for the second part, I have not touched it yet. Remember, this is 1936. There was no climbing of planes there in the first version. Rather, Savitri moved through the worlds of night, of twilight, of day, all, of course, in a spiritual sense, and ended by calling down the power of the higher worlds of Satchidananda. I had no idea of what the supramental world could be like at that time, so it could not enter into the scheme. As for expressing the supramental inspiration, that is a matter of the future. 1936.
It is interesting that the bulk of the book, which was added later on, is Traveler of the Worlds.
Yes.
So, Sri Aurobindo wrote all of Mother's experiences, but he, as always, with all his divine humility, he held back his own experiences, so which come later as Traveler of the Worlds. So we continue. There is something very interesting which follows on page 112.
Beginning with the communion of spiritual.
Yes. How does, what is the matrix of spiritual experience and how does it work out? So because in our experience at this point of time, we are all separate beings, separate entities, and we have to reach out through the gates of sense, through organs of action, what is called as Jnanendriya, Karmendriya, and that's how we try to once again reconstruct that connectedness, which anyways is there. But in the spiritual experience, this connectedness is always there. So now Sri Aurobindo gives us that glimpse, a little glimpse. A communion of spiritual entities, a genius of creative immanence, makes all creation deeply intimate. At one place, the mother says that true creativity, very often we say, oh, so and so is very creative, and there are so many beautiful poems and everything which have come out into the world. But the mother says that most of the time when we say something new, it's actually a little angle of distortion of the original creativity, because true creativity has to be from the creator. The logic is this. So a true creative person has to be like a pure channel which just transmits, receives and transmits without any kind of distortion. And she is revealing to us, he is revealing to us the source of creativity, a genius of creative immanence, that source which is hidden inside the heart of everything, makes all creation deeply intimate a fourth dimension of aesthetic sense where all is in ourselves in all. So, this is the ground of this experience, the matrix. And very interestingly, now people speak about the fourth dimension. It's been a subject of much speculation in the field of science. Initially, people spoke about three dimensions. Then they spoke about the fourth dimension as time. And the famous story of the sphere, supposing, a sphere enters a purely two-dimensional world. So the two-dimensional world cannot understand the sphere because it just exists. It knows about the length and the breadth. It doesn't understand anything like a height. Until it becomes the sphere, there is no other way. It cannot extend itself and understand it. So the mother speaks about this fourth dimension in several places in her writings, that this is the matrix where spiritual experience actually takes place. And here Sri Aurobindo is revealing to us a fourth dimension of aesthetic sense. So this is the ground where all appears beautiful with the true beauty, because all appears in its divine essence. Where all is in ourselves in all. To the cosmic wideness realigns our souls. So, right now our soul is aligned to the cosmic separateness. It is kind of identified with it. So, it sees everything as separate, different, distinct. But then it can realign to the universal and awaken to the deeper truth. A kindling rapture joins the seer and seen. It's a marvelous expression which follow here. How the universe is experienced from within outwards. Right now we experience it from outward within, but from within outwards. A kindling rapture. We can get an inkling of it in moments of love, where suddenly there is a rapturous sense of two beings growing one. This is a rapture. But here look what Sri Aurobindo is saying, kindling rapture, something which ignites a flame. So it's a rapture which is contagious and ignites a flame. And that is the experience. How Sri Aurobindo would look at someone and say, oh, it's a relationship that has declared itself through lives. This reminds me of the story of Charu Chandra Dutt. The difference between experiencing from within outwards and from outside within. So Charu Dutt was very cross with Sri Aurobindo. He was also in the freedom struggle, and he was very cross because Sri Aurobindo, apparently according to him, left the movement and came. So he said the chief has abandoned us, and so burnt away many of the letters, precious letters that he had. All that he kept was one of the books of the Gita which Sri Aurobindo used to read, and that Sri Aurobindo had given to him, and he kept it. Somehow he didn't, leave it. And he was very unhappy till one day Dilip Kumar Roy mentioned to Sri Aurobindo about Charu Dutt. And Sri Aurobindo says, yes, of course, Charu, I know him very well. He is one of those with whom the relationship declares itself through many lives. We have fought through the battle of the ages. But in this life, I couldn't call him because the nature of the work was different. And my own preoccupations, I suppose. Look at the divine humility. Now, when this goes to him, he is absolutely surprised. And his wife admonished him, look, I have been telling you to write to Sri Aurobindo, he will give you peace. So, look how this is a different seeing, and then his whole heart is lit by a flame, a kindling rapture. Oh, he knows me, he recognizes me, he remembers me, not just in one life, but many lives. So this is like a kindling rapture.
In 1968, I took a knee to Mother for the first time. And Mother looked at her and she said, "This is not the first time we have met. You have been with me many times before, many times."
Yes. And what happens inside at that moment? Yes. The craftsman and the craft grow inly one, because The creation is an extension of the creator. So this is one of the very important metaphysical elements born out of a deep spiritual experience that we find in Indian thought, that there is no, clear-cut dividing line, something which cannot be crossed between creation and the creator. The creation is an extension of the creator. As the mother says, the world is an objectivization of ourselves. And actually it is so true even in our little experience of everyday life. The people we meet, the experiences we undergo, if we look deep inside, they are nothing but projections of ourselves which create circumstances, situations, relationships, experiences which are nothing else but deep hidden needs, deep hidden possibilities, deep hidden difficulties which take objective form and are, we come across in the world. So this is even a truth of our everyday life, but we have forgotten it, and so we blame, always there is somebody else to blame. But the divine can't blame anyone, because the whole thing goes back to him. This world is himself objectivized. And look at this line, inly one, achieve perfection by the magic throb and passion of their close identity. This is the way of the divine. That all that he keeps doing is to push more and more love and to call these souls of the strong to the Leela of Krishna and Kali. Souls of the strong. I am here to call. So that's how he works. Achieves perfection by the magic throb and passion of their close identity, because the creation and the creator are one. So that's how. Yes.
Now he talks about us.
Yes. All that we slowly piece from gathered parts, or by long labor stumblingly evolve, is there, self-born, by its eternal right. That is the original plan which keeps on pushing itself into the world, and that is where the hope lies. And so the world is bound to ultimately feel the pressure of the change. Even about the ashram, even recently someone was asking me in another context that we are going to plan a center, should we not first have the building? It doesn't work like that. In the ashram context, she says everything has grown by a pressure of consciousness. In fact, if the building is there and the truth is not there, it will be dangerous. It is much better to have the truth and the building emerge as a consequence. And that's how the ashram has grown and continues to grow and spread far and
Mother
wide.
said to us, always begin small.
Yes. Infant step. That's how nature works, no?
Yes.
One infant step
Yes.
is the prelude to an epic climb. And so now comes the beauty. In us too the intuitive fire can burn. This possibility of the original creative immanence, it's possible that we too can be kindled by its rapture. And in us too the intuitive fire can burn. An agent light, it is coiled in our folded hearts. On the celestial levels is its home. Descending, it can bring those heavens here. This is the plain and simple logic of things. Yet a veil behind the heart and a lid above the mind.
Keep us from the divine.
Keep us from the divine.
In the end, love and devotion rend the veil.
In the mind, silence,
The lid,
thins out and vanishes. That's all. Yoga simplified. People say Sri Aurobindo's yoga is very difficult. It is one of the easiest yoga, I must say. So easy that it's hard to believe it is so easy.
We want to make it difficult.
Difficult, complicated. Love and devotion rend the veil. In the stillness of the mind, the lid thins out and vanishes. And then there is nothing else but soul within and grace above. All that we need to know. Descending, it can bring those heavens here. But we have a problem, our real problem. But rarely burns the flame, nor burns for long. The joy it calls from those diviner heights brings brief, magnificent reminiscences. Look at the word, reminiscences. Shubinda is a magical way of using, of course, language. He's the master, the incarnate word. Reminiscences of what? Of whose? Exactly what you were saying, that the mother says that you and me are, we have been together in many lives. Now, normally we talk about reminiscences as something that has happened in the past and I remember it. Now, look at this kind of reminiscence. Suddenly, one walks into the ashram for the first time and says, "This is my home." Which sense, which faculty experiences it? So, that can bring that joy, that intuitive light. It's only through intuition that we can know the divine and recognize the divine. And high, splendid glimpses of interpreting thought, but not the utter vision and delight. Why not? A veil is kept, something is still held back, lest, captives of the beauty and the joy, our souls forget to the highest to aspire. This is the big challenge. It is said in spiritual traditions, and I deeply believe it. Maybe I want to believe it, but I believe it. It's true. It's said in traditions that all the greatest experiences, the ultimate ones, they are held back by the divine for towards the later part of your journey. So we have to be very patient, because if they are given too early, it's too premature. It can imbalance us, or sometimes the spiritual ego may develop. All kinds of things may happen. So many things will come. Shubinda says that many experiences, except the central and cardinal ones, they are held back, so that there is always something which keeps you a glimpse and then he hides, a glimpse and then he hides, and we keep moving. So it's something very interesting. It's a whole preparation. And then the lines follow are amazing. In that fair, subtle realm behind our own, it's right next door. Mother sometimes says it's a question of one step.
Yeah.
You take a step and you are here, and you take another step and you are there. The form is all, and physical gods are kings. So in that subtle physical realm, the emphasis is on beauty. Like in the vital world, the emphasis is on power. And in the mental world, the emphasis is on knowledge. So here it is the form, beauty. The inspiring light plays in fine boundaries. A faultless beauty comes by nature's grace. There, liberty is perfection's guarantee. Another amazing line. Normally, it is rules and technique that guarantee perfection in our normal life. But there, liberty. Look how casual steps of nature create the wonder of a rose. There's a line in Savitri, no?
Yes.
Random footfalls of nature. So casually, and yet there is the marvel of the rose blooming amidst a background of wild wilderness. And you just wonder who would have painted this. Imagine. I mean, only the divine artist can do it. And it's random, like strokes of a genius. It's not planned, thought out, not with a, pen and paper and scale
I'm going to
measured.
make a rose.
I'm going to make a rose. Let me do it. It's something marvelous. Liberty is perfection's guarantee. Although the absolute image lacks, the word incarnate, the sheer spiritual ecstasy, all is a miracle of symmetric charm, a fantasy of perfect line and rule, and made in freedom. That's the beauty of it. I mean, if one looks at a seashell, it's amazing. If it's a small little thing with such a perfection of shapes, and if you come to think about it, how is it formed? By the gnashing and splashing of the wild waves. How is it made? I mean, it's something amazing if you just look at it. These are wild waves. And sometimes the forms are so intricate, so beautiful. And
Yeah. But in this world, the absolute image
yes.
is lacking.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
That is only beyond
Yes.
that supramental world and beyond. So, there, and that is the problem of these worlds, there all feel satisfied in themselves and whole. A rich completeness is by limit made. Marvel in an utter littleness abounds. An intricate rapture riots in a small space. That is how we conceive the heavens are. Here, of course, these are heavens of the physical world, subtle physical world. But there is a problem there. The problem is everything is too good. And therefore, it doesn't seek for anything more. That follows. Each rhythm is kin to its environment. So there is no jarring of colors, no jarring of forms. It's blending and fusing and conterminous with the environment. But it's very good model for, we are going to make smart cities. We should take a leaf out of this. How it should be, how things should blend with the environment. Look at the service tree and the samadhi. I think this is a perfect example of that. Blending with, no artificial canopy. It's just the tree and the samadhi, as if they are meant for each other. And how it has come about, it's amazing. Each object faultlessly built for charm and use. All is enamored of its own delight. Intact it lives of its perfection sure, in a heaven-pleased, self-glad immunity. It cannot be disrupted. Unlike, the kind of perfection we experience in life, it's held back with great difficulty. It's a perilous perfection, precarious perfection, because we don't know. You make a beautiful picture and next minute a little child has to just come and splash some water over it. It's gone. We want to guard it. But there it's going to remain just as it is. So it's something, that's what they experience. Content to be, it has need of nothing more. And now follows these magical lines, one of our favorite ones. Here was not futile efforts, broken heart. So many people, when they think of an ideal world, they would think of this. But we shouldn't forget that the absolute image lacks here. Here was not futile efforts, broken heart, exempt from the ordeal and the test, empty of opposition and of pain. It was a world that could not fear nor grieve. It had no grace of error or defeat. That's what is missing there. And that's why the full perfection, the absolute perfection, is not allowed. It's a perfection limited within a certain symmetry of form. And because the divine wants us to evolve, that's why always he introduces here a little seed of discontent in everything. So that one is never quite fully happy and satisfied. And if one is fully happy and satisfied, it's a most dangerous situation to be in. That means for some time the divine has ensured that we are not going to progress.
How beautiful that line, no grace.
No error. Grace, that's why. Yes, suddenly with one word, again, the magic of the language, with one word he changes everything, and look how he puts grace.
Yes,
one can never imagine the use of this word, grace, with error and defeat.
Yeah. I remember, I don't know if it was Amal who said that Sri Aurobindo doesn't write in English, he writes English.
Yeah, he writes English. And you know what marvelous experiences sometimes one line can unlock. Now I am reminded of a story. It's there, there are very many stories of, which interesting stories. Grace of error or defeat. Now, as children, we grew up with a very interesting story of Porus and Alexander. Alexander is called as Sikandar in that part of India. And obviously Alexander is a conqueror. And he conquers Porus. But Porus is a valiant warrior. And he had to use all kinds of tricks and deception, as the legend goes, to finally win over him. And when Porus is brought to the court of Alexander, Alexander says, well, how do you want me to treat you? You are now my subject. And look how even in defeat, he holds his head high, and Porus says, well, I would like you to treat me as a king would treat a king. Now, this story is impressed upon us to remind us that you don't lose when you lose physically. You lose when you lose here. And he is very impressed. And in that whole story, the beauty is the vanquished seemingly becomes like a victor. That whole story is to inspire us by the character of Porus, that look, even in defeat, there is something in you which can take it with such a grace and rise many notches up. So here it is, These lines, it had no grace of error or defeat. It had no room for fault. And again, no power to fail. It had no room for fault, no power to fail. So, again, failure. How can there be a power to fail? There is an aphorism of Sri Aurobindo where he says, God is indeed great. He is omnipotent. That is why he can afford to fail. Because he knows he is omnipotent. Greatness lies in that, to accept the challenge. He can become a weakling because he is truly great. So, no power to fail. That's why, when they show these gods, Puranic gods, they are very jealous. They cannot accept failure, and sometimes they are much more miserable than human beings. And the mother made that comment that they are worse than human beings. Human beings, at least, because we go through this most important lesson of life called humility, we can always open to higher and deeper vistas. And that's why we are evolutionary beings, unlike gods who are typal beings. They don't know what is failure. They don't know what is error. They don't know what is defeat. But when they have to evolve, they have to face it.
And many don't want.
Many don't want. Out of some packed self-bliss it drew at once its form discoveries of the mute idea and the miracle of its rhythmic thoughts and acts, its clear technique of firm and rounded lives, its gracious people of inanimate shapes and glory of breathing bodies like our own.
That's interesting.
Yes. So it lives by a different kind of life. It has its own life and bodies which seem to even breathe. And yet, all the forms there are drawn from a deep, intuitive, creative side. It draws from that bliss. It's not something which they learn, like we have to learn. And many artists, what we call as talent, people who are artists by birth, they carry this talent, are actually in contact with these worlds. Sometimes the subtle physical, sometimes the vital, and these images flash upon them, they crowd into their mind and they just create things which are marvel.
Yeah.
It's because they are in contact with this subtle world. Otherwise, you may teach technique. But there are many people who learn painting, drawing, music. But Beethoven is Beethoven. Yeah. And Mother speaks about even Beethoven in this context that she says, once I entered the subtle physical and suddenly there was a bursting of all the notes like Beethoven's. So that's where they get in touch with and they create so much of beauty and greatness upon earth just by being in contact with those worlds.
Brahms
Said
yes, that he could go into those worlds and any chord or note that he wanted, he could just bring down onto the page.
Yes. But we have to go beyond. That's the beauty. We are not here to become that. But that is possible. Amazed, his senses ravished with delight, he moved in a divine yet kindred world, admiring marvelous forms so near to ours. Kindred, just next door.
Kindred.
And yet it's a marvelous world.
Now this is Ashwapati.
Yes, Ashwapati.
Moving through this world.
He is taking joy in these worlds. But the beauty of Ashwapati is he doesn't stop anywhere. So, yet perfect, like the playthings of a god, deathless in the aspect of mortality. It's very interesting, what is mortality in here? Anything which is limited is mortal by its very nature. Because only the limitless can be immortal. And yet these forms don't die or vanish. They can either change, they have a plasticity, or they can be reabsorbed back into the one. So it's deathless in its aspect of mortality. How beautiful this line is. In their narrow and exclusive absolute. So here it is that, what does Sri Aurobindo really... In their narrow and exclusive absolutes, the finite's ranked supremacies throned abide. It dreams not ever of what might have been. Only in boundaries can this absolute live. So there is a whole hierarchy of beings, even in the subtle world. That is the true hierarchy. And it projects itself on earth, and on earth it becomes a pell-mell thing. For instance, the soul of a species, the mother speaks of it. The serpent species, there is a actual naga who is like in the subtle physical, one can contact this being, and he controls all these other serpents. Similarly, the cat, she speaks of that. And there, for the cats, that is the absolute. Vivekananda gives this example that if the cat were to construct a god, it would think of a super cat. So, so they are absolute. I mean, for a cat world, that cat is really the absolute. But it is within its boundary, it doesn't go further, it doesn't feel the need because it's a super cat. It's not threatened by other creatures who may swallow because it's a world where everything is living by their limits. It's not a world where we have to hazard the adventure of the unseen, the unknown, and all the worlds coming together, the titanic and the godlike. Ours is a more difficult, much more difficult task. Divine has imposed too much of trust in us. That's how I look at it. And we reply back with very little trust in the divine. We also follow him by trusting humanity instead of trusting the divine. In a supremeness bound to its own plan, where all was finished and no widths were left. See, again, this super cat met the mother, and this king of the species met the mother. Now, I sometimes wonder what dialogue ensued between the two. Imagine the divine mother is there, and they know that she is the divine mother, the supreme mother. And what do they ask? The king of serpents says, "Don't. If none of your disciple kills mine, then I will also make sure that I will not kill any of your disciple." Now, when you meet the Divine Mother, this is not what you ask. You say, "Mother, I am yours for all lives." But this is where the problem comes. They are so perfect within their limit, they cannot conceive. It's their relation with the spirit of nature and beyond with the divine. And that they are very satisfied with that. They don't even seek to become one with the absolute. That's the job of the psychic being. Only in boundaries can this absolute live. In a supremeness bound to its own plan, where all was finished and no widths were left, no space for shadows of the immeasurable, no room for the incalculable's surprise. And this is a world for the incalculable surprise, where certain boundaries, certain gaps are left for the divine to enter through them. These interventions which make this world a delightful play. In bonsai, I had heard this story and I really admired it because it's almost like a spiritual truth that the masters, when they make a bonsai, they leave the scissor there. And as the legend goes, that they do it because they believe that, okay, it's perfect according to me, but maybe somebody may come who may conceive perfection in another way, and they are free to change it, and so the scissor is there. And I really admire this. Beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. So this is evolution on earth, where there is always a surprise for the incalculable. And I think in our own lives we should keep it. Otherwise we always believe too much that everything can be controlled by our thought and reason. A captive of its own beauty and ecstasy. In a magic circle wrought the enchanted might. The spirit stood back, effaced behind its frame. This is the danger and problem of a world which is happy within itself. And I think I have shared this earlier also. I had this impression in Singapore, I had this impression in places that this is a world which is kind of a dead world, very beautiful on the outside, but so hollow inside, captive of its own beauty and joy. There is no problem, no challenge, nothing to evolve, nothing for really. And that's how degradation starts. If you look at Roman Empire, it had extended itself far and wide, and then how the fall began. And that helped eventually. The fall began when it all the people became gluttons and they believed that, well, there's nothing more. Nobody can challenge us. So, admired for the bright finality of its lines, a blue horizon limited the soul. Thought moved in luminous facilities, the outer ideals shallows its swim range. Life in its boundaries lingered satisfied with the small happiness of the body's acts. So that is a world in which the whole emphasis is on form and form and form. The beauty of form, the charm of form, the perfection of form, and within that the spirit consents to tie itself. So a world very nice to the outside, but it doesn't go deep. It doesn't know the depths. Assigned as force to a bound corner mind, attached to the safe paucity of a room. How beautiful this line is, and everyday life, to remain shut inside a room. Yes, it's safe, but it's also impoverished. It's, Mother says that many people who think that is spiritual life, they start eliminating one thing after another because there will be risk of error, because there is a risk of failure, because there is a risk of difficulty. So they eliminate the possibility along with the risk. And eventually, by eliminating everything, they think that they would enter into nirvana. And then she takes a dig and says, but if the Lord wanted nirvana, there would be nothing else but nirvana. And then she gives us the mantra, instead, take everything, and she emphasizes everything, 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 and offer it to the light for transformation. This is another path. So, she did her little works and played and slept and thought not of a greater work undone. So, when we experience failure and falls and difficulties in life, it's really grace. It keeps us, it's like a reminder, alarm clock. Oh, there is something yet to be done. So God's reminders that there are problems to be solved, issues to be tackled. Forgetful of her violent, vast desires, forgetful of the heights to which she rose, her walk was fixed within a radiant grove. It's again like the perfection of a seashell. It knows not the sea that has shaped it. It is content to lie on the sand. That's it. That's its life. It is beautiful, but it's limited. The beautiful body of a soul at ease, like one who laughs in sweet and sunlit groves, childlike she swung in her gold cradle of joy. And then he says so beautifully, the spaces call reached not her charmed abode. Like a little bird in a nest, very happy, all safe, all contented. Or a parrot in a cage who recites mantras because he's been taught the mantras, but knows not what it means to, soar wide and high into the skies and pluck the mantra out of the breast of the unknown. That it doesn't know. It always relies on something from outside. It's very beautiful. Everybody comes and appreciates and flatters it, and the parrot is happy. It is given everything. She had no wings for wide and dangerous flight. She faced no peril of sky or of abyss. She knew no vistas and no mighty dreams, no yearning for her lost infinitudes. A perfect picture in a perfect frame. Sometimes, again, Sri Aurobindo, so marvelously, if we read this line in isolation, a perfect picture in a perfect frame, we would say, how wonderful. But when you read it with the background, it's an ironical statement, almost satirical. Very gentle, a perfect picture in a perfect frame. But what a limitation, what a imprisonment, what an impoverishment, what a paucity. And yet it is a perfect picture in a perfect frame, and that's not what we are meant to be. And therefore, this fairy artistry could not keep his will. All who are meant for a greater life cannot remain contented and satisfied with that kind of perfection. That's why I often say, people say that, India has so many problems. So, particularly, people who come from US and they say, oh my God, so many problems. I said, thank God. So, we have to keep praying, we have to keep aspiring, we have to keep working. There is always something to labor on. So, the problems will be solved when we have reached a certain level of inner evolution. Then they will be solved from within outwards. But if you create everything solved on the surfaces from the outside, then we'll become like another encrusted civilization. And
It's been tried again and again.
Yes. Atlantis,
Yes.
Lanka, there have been civilizations like that, Mayan civilization. And Sri Aurobindo cautions us. He says that it will be very dangerous for India if it goes the way of the Western ideal of perfection. Very dangerous. It lose its own Swadharma and become like another industrially equipped, rich and militarily powerful state. But empty. Forgetful of its soul. Only a moment's fine release it gave. That's another very interesting line. A careless hour was spent in a slight bliss. So again about India, they have this, in India there is a saying that many nations are bhogyonis and India is yogyoni. It means they are meant for joy, pleasure, very nice. So if you go there, you will have joy and pleasure. But for a moment, careless hour. But if you want to do yoga, then India is yogyoni. You have to know nothing about yoga, do nothing, yet you will end up doing yoga, walking on the streets. You have to have perfect balance and equanimity. You see, for every road rage case which comes to light, there are hundreds where road rage could have taken place. But perforce people, practice.
Hundreds every hour.
Every hour. You cannot live in India without equanimity. Without prayer, without aspiration. You will be most unhappy if you don't believe in God. Because then there is nothing else to believe in. So, this land is meant for yoga, not for bhoga. So, actually, you have this thought. This fairy artistry could not keep his will. Only a moment's fine release it gave. So it's all right for holidaying. Subtle physical. A careless hour was spent in a slight bliss. It's okay. Go on holiday to Singapore. Fine. Do some shopping. Don't live there. Come back to this real world out here where you can spread your wings wide and far and take that delightful, dangerous flight. Our spirit tires of being surfaces. How long can we live? Christ's famous saying, man does not live by bread alone. How long can we be satisfied only with food and animal kind of life, with clothes and a good house? How long? So here it is. Our spirit tires of being surfaces. Something within us gets tired. It doesn't like it. A lot of frustration people experience nowadays, and now this term has come. Very interesting in psychiatry. Not mainstream, but offbeat psychiatry. Spiritual emergency. So I have had some people writing to me as mail, I am in a state of spiritual emergency. I said, that's all right, but we can cut away the term and all and let's talk facts. And it's true that, what is called as existential crisis. Yes. Many people experience it today because now they have things which can, as Sri Aurobindo uses the word, satiated, but not satisfied. You have objects which can involve your senses. And people, the best interesting part is something which I hear very often from present generation. I am not sounding like an old man, but nevertheless, they say, I'm getting bored. Yeah. Now, the strange part is I too get bored now. But as a young boy, and there was nothing in my village, if light came, it was only for 2 hours. It was a celebration. You didn't realize what you can do in those 2 hours. Maybe study, maybe, cook, maybe have your meal. Ultimately, it was like, okay, light has come, it's going to go. So it made no difference. And all that we had was some simple games and lot of stars, and that's it. As the famous poet says, time to stand and stare. But the thing is, I don't remember a single moment when I felt bored. I don't know why there was no boredom. But today, with everything, there is boredom. And now I understand why this boredom comes and creeps into people today. Because, smartphones, this, that, they are doing it. But after a while, it cannot engage you. So you look for new things, for a newer version, for a better speed. But eventually, again, you want to get onto something else. But in the bargain, something else you are missing. And I have my own funny way to look at it that, Steve Jobs, the sign is half an apple. And, people say that Neem Karoli Baba bit an apple. This is probably a myth. He bit into an apple and gave him. And that's how he got the inspiration. He did go to Neem Karoli Baba. This is a fact. What transpired, we don't know. But sometimes I wish, why didn't he eat the full apple? Probably he would have been a yogi. He created everything which is wonderful, fine. But it also at another place hooks you and binds you. And the legacy he has left can work both ways. So sometimes I feel if he would have eaten the whole apple, perhaps it would have been much better. Now we have a half perfection where we have all the gadgets and wonderful things. It's like that subtle physical. Things pressing in the subtle physical and you admire them. But the problem is they can satiate you but equally leave you utterly frustrated, bored and dissatisfied and restless. Because all the energies are getting logged in a limited perfection. Exteriorized. So this is where Sri Aurobindo is giving us a very wonderful lesson through just these few lines in the subtle physical. Our spirit tires of being's surfaces. Transcended is the splendor of the form. And wherever people have been enchanted only by the form, it doesn't last long. This is a well-known fact. It turns to hidden powers and deeper states. And look what happened in America, for instance. Now, post-industrial revolution and a rational society where everything was so good and people, because they were tired of this, they broke into this quest for deeper states and took to drugs. The whole hippie culture which came up was actually to search for alternate states of consciousness.
Exactly.
And, actually it was a blessing. It was a, blessing in disguise. It broke away something which was going to develop into a very hard pattern. And something has broken off from there and that niche remains in the psyche of America. And through that the light enters. Even till now, we no more have the hippie movement. But there are people who are seeking alternate states, which is something very beautiful which has happened in that country.
And Mother has spoken
about it. When the Beatles came and the hippies came, she said they are the barbarians of the new world. Nevertheless, of the new world. So they broke free. And recently, I think they were showing that John Lennon died, no? He was killed on the Central Park and there were people with a candle. And I was just wondering, look, it's so interesting. In India, we cannot imagine that if a musician dies, we would hold a flame and have a candle light. But then, suddenly I was as if taken to the other side and identified with those images. And I felt it's understandable that, he was like a god who suddenly broke open a door. That was his job, nothing else. But that job was very important because that's how people can now look for something else. They are not satisfied with, things which are outwardly fascinating. So
I sent Mother 50 different recordings up to the latest time. She wrote to me that she hadn't heard anything from such and such a year on.
Yes,
and I found all of those. And I sent her the Doors.
Oh.
Some of you will know the
Yeah,
Doors,
yeah.
the group. And she said they are standing on the threshold, but they don't yet know how to cross over.
This was their work, actually. They suddenly trying something new maybe out of fashion, maybe some inspiration, God's plan, they suddenly opened a door. But they didn't know anything about it. So they entered into haywire, into vital worlds, this world, mostly the vital worlds. They got projected, but nevertheless, for humanity, for that kind of humanity, which was otherwise locked in a kind of symmetrical perfection, they opened a door. So, we have this God's ways. It turns to hidden powers and deeper states. So now he looked beyond for greater light. So Ashipati also. Only thing is, that's not the path that man should take. Because most of the time, they may unlock a door, but we enter into sometimes very dark, dangerous world. Because being surfaces also keep us safe from the not only the gods, but also the demon and the jinn. So you unlock the door and it's like, sometimes the lifts are like that. Some of the lifts in India, be careful when you enter. Because, you open the door and the lift is not there. Yeah, my building lift used to be like that. And you take a step unmindful and you fall into the abyss. But I said this is very good. It makes me conscious, You have to be very conscious. Even when you are entering a lift, you can't afford to be unconscious. So I said, India is made for yoga and nothing else. If you want bhoga, go for a while somewhere else. For yoga, come back. So now he looked beyond for greater light. His soul's peak climbed, abandoning in its rear this brilliant courtyard of the house of days. This has to be done. One has to abandon it for the greater climb. He left that fine material paradise. This had one time precipitated upon earth. Mother speaks of that. But that's not that picture perfect, even over mind creation, picture perfect.
Yes.
But that has to be dissolved because it is still within limits and boundaries. And whatever is within limits and boundaries, it is deathless in its mortal state.
Yes.
That the divine doesn't want. He left that fine material paradise. His destiny lay beyond in larger space. End of Canto 2.